priest in the church of Santa Lucia. I was an altar boy, gardener, I did housework, I did a lot of small jobs, and now I don't even have the time to say goodbye. That's the problem.
The center's occupants, asylum seekers hoping to obtain refugee status. Boasting a library and even a nursery for children, the center was once praised as a model for integration. Its closure marks the first major eviction since the government enacted a hardline immigration law, which many left-wing mayors and rights groups criticized.
The ugliest thing is that we talk about security law. I don't think it's about security because, unfortunately, in a few months we'll see the effects of this chaos they're creating on purpose. The only result is that they destroyed something that worked very well.
Matteo Salvini claims the Castelnuovo di Porto Center and similar structures are hubs for drug dealing and too costly. Instead, he says the migrants who, quote, have rights will be relocated, while the rest will be deported.
As regards Castelnuovo, we've made a commitment to Italians to close the big centres and move people to smaller, more manageable and transparent centres.
Salvini has also threatened to close its ports to the Sophia mission, an EU-wide anti-smuggling operation in the Mediterranean Sea. The threat led Germany to suspend its participation in the mission.
Next, the former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond has been charged with attempted rape and sexual assault in court in Edinburgh. Mr. Salmond didn't enter a plea and is currently free on bail.
He was the face of Scottish nationalism for decades. Charismatic and popular, he led the Scottish National Party into government in 2007, then took the country to the brink of independence in a historic referendum. Now the former leader of Scotland is in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Arrested on Wednesday, he faces 14 charges: attempted rape, indecent assault and breach of the peace. Outside court in Edinburgh, he denied any wrongdoing.
I refute absolutely these allegations of criminality, and I'll defend myself to the utmost in court. I've got great faith in the court system of Scotland. I've got recent cause to have great faith in the court system of Scotland. That is where I'll state my case.
The claims by two female members of staff date back to 2013. An unenviable situation for Scotland's leader, Nicola Sturgeon. Salmond, her friend and mentor for over 30 years. She was the one who instigated a government inquiry into the allegations.
These are now live criminal proceedings, and now more than ever it would be completely inappropriate for me, or anyone else for that matter, to comment in any detail, and I hope both the media and indeed members of the public will understand that position.
Earlier this month, Salmond won a judicial review against the Scottish Government's handling of the inquiry, but the police's separate criminal investigation continues.
Malaysian royals have elected a new king. Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmad Shah will take up the largest ceremonial role. This after the previous king's surprise abdication earlier this month. Malaysia is a constitutional monarchy where rulers of 9 Malay states elect a monarch for a 5-year term. A unique system in many ways has been in place since the country's independence from the British in 1957. With more here at France 24, Liana Lee.
59-year-old Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmad Shah is set to become Malaysia's 16th king. The British-educated royal is a keen sports fan and a member of several international bodies, such as FIFA and the International Hockey Federation. He's set to juggle his current responsibilities with his new ones as monarch, but only for the next 5 years. Malaysia's unique constitutional monarchy stipulates that each of the 9 Malay royal families takes turns to sit on the throne in Kuala Lumpur. Leaders of each clan vote to confirm the next king in a secret ballot, where a majority of at least 5 votes is needed. Sultan Abdullah had only just become ruler of the central state of Pahang mid-January. He replaced his ailing father as he knew his family was up for the top job. The abrupt changes happened after his predecessor Mohammed V's surprise abdication earlier this month. The unprecedented move came after rumors of his marriage with a Russian beauty queen. Malaysian kings have no political power. The one who sits on the throne is, however, the head of Islam in the country and has power to grant pardons. Mohammed V, for example, pardoned opposition politician Anwar Ibrahim, who was convicted of sodomy. Monarchs also have a budget of $1.21 million a year for their expenses.
It's time now for sport, and with the story of the night, Alexander Ocot joins us. That story before I let loose, Alex, is that Thierry Henry, the French soccer legend, has been relieved of his duties by AS Monaco. AS Monaco, of course, where he launched his career very much as a player, and he goes there with a big fanfare after his big success in the World Cup with Belgium, and it all seems to be going well, from bad to worse, and now he's been effectively given the boot, hasn't he?
Exactly, yeah. Currently wallowing second from bottom in the French top division, the 2017 champions have suspended the former Arsenal and France striker as coach with immediate effect until they make a final decision on his future. You know, we can read between the lines there that he has probably gone. The 41-year-old World Cup winner with France in 1998 assisted in the training with Belgium in the latest World Cup. But this was his first job as manager, and he took that 3 months ago. The suspension follows two embarrassing recent losses for Monaco, 5-1 at home to Strasbourg last weekend and 3-1 at home to Metz, or Metz as they say here, in the French Cup on Tuesday. The assistant coach Franck Passy will take charge for now, but it's rumoured that Leonardo Jardim, Henry's predecessor, who was sacked himself in October, will be the one who will replace him.
It's a phenomenal development, isn't it? Of course, they pay off one manager to bring in Henry, and then would perhaps bring that same guy back.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe it, would you?
Yeah, perhaps second time lucky. We'll
see. Anyway, carry on, please.
Right, next up, some sad news about the search for the former Nantes striker Emiliano Sala. The search has now been called off. The Argentine footballer, who signed for Premiership side Cardiff City at the weekend, went missing after the light aircraft he was travelling in went down over the English Channel. The Coast Guard has ended its operations after finding no trace of him or the plane during a 3-day search over the freezing waters. For now, since nothing has been found, however, Salah's family and Nantes football team say they're still hoping for a miracle and that there will be no tributes, no minute of silence, and nothing to symbolise his death. Earlier today, the Nantes head coach was visibly emotional as he talked to the press.
For me, this is perhaps the most difficult moment of my sporting life. I've known others, but in my sporting life, this has completely unsettled me. I've been in football for years and years. I've rarely seen anyone so endearing, so humble, so modest. On the pitch, he's a warrior. During training, he never complained about anything.
Now looking to tonight's football results from the French Cup group of 16, where Lyon have triumphed away at Amiens. Moussa Dembele, the first to put a mark on the scoreboard, and knocking in Nabil Fekir's pass at 28 minutes, and Leo Dubois made it 2-0 soon after. Right after the end of the first half, however, Lyon went down to 10 men, the Brazilian player Fernando Marçal getting a red card, but they did hold on to that to maintain that advantage. Now, earlier today, Vitre beat the Le Havre 3-0 at home, and Essie Bester beat Noisy-le-Grand 2-1. The match between Entendre SSG and Nantes has been postponed, I remind you, until Sunday due to that unfortunate news about Emiliano Sala. That's it for the football. We now move on to some tennis, and Rafa Nadal, he's made it through to the final of the Australian Open following a 6-2, 6-4, 6-love demolition of Stefanos Tsitsipas. It's even more impressive, actually, since this is the first tournament the Spaniard has played in 4 months after undergoing surgeries for a series of injuries. But so far, he's not dropped a set during his 6 matches at Melbourne, but he says he's had to change the way he plays in order to stay on top.
Today I have to adapt my game to the new time and to my age. That's all, and that's what I did during all my career. I know during that 15, 16 years, 17 years of tennis, professional tennis career, I'm gonna lose things on my way, so I need to add new things, and that's what I try to do during all my career, to improve the things that I can improve.
Now, joining Nadal on court for the final will be either the Serbian world number one, Novak Djokovic, or the Frenchman, Luca Pouille, who they're going to play tomorrow, about 9 a.m. French time. The six-time champion Djokovic is hunting down the record for the most Australian Open men's singles titles. He's currently on par with Roger Federer and the 1960s Australian star Roy Emerson. Now, moving over to the women's final, and that will be a match-up between Naomi Osaka and Petra Kvitova. The 21 Japanese Osaka is in the form of her life right now after claiming the US Open last season. She's on a 13-match Grand Slam winning streak, and she defeated Karolina Pliskova 6-2, 4-6, 6-4 in the semi-finals. Meanwhile, Petra Kvitova beat Danielle Collins 7-6, 6-love, and the winner of that high-stakes match will also be crowned the women's world number one. So lots to play for there.
Indeed. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alexander Okot there with the sports. Yeah, really getting sacked. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Thank you for that. Time for Focus. Mauritania in Northwest Africa is where we're going. In 2010, a court there sentenced 3 Al-Qaeda militants to death for the murder of 4 French tourists. The brutal killings had an impact on the country's economic fortunes as Paris issued a travel warning and tourists stayed away. But now visitors are beginning to return to take in the stunning desert landscapes.
Marred by years of violence, this region in northern Mauritania was until recently closed off to tourists. After a 10-year hiatus for security reasons, the so-called desert train is back on its rail tracks, and visitors are returning to the region.
This is lovely. The breeze is refreshing.
Welcome to the desert train. This is the line it runs on. It's a single-track railway.
It's only been 2 years since France lifted a ban that made it illegal for its citizens to travel within the region. In 2007, 4 French nationals were murdered in the south of the country. Sidi Ahmed is now back at work, guiding a group of French tourists across the scorching desert.
A lot of the Sahara is still out of bounds. It's such a shame, because it's an incredibly beautiful place.
This train is the easiest way for them to get around the Sahara, as it takes them to areas that would still be difficult to access. Not only does it make for some stunning photos, but it's also the chance for them to take the journey into their own hands. A lifelong dream for Jean-Noël Triquet. After which he and his wife make their way to the very front of the train.
It's like being in a film. This is the life. Give me a kiss.
An exciting way for the couple to celebrate their 46th wedding anniversary.
I welcome you all to my little hometown.
At the end of the afternoon, they make a stop in Zouarate to visit the country's largest iron ore mine. It's a crucial step towards understanding the history behind the rail tracks they're travelling on. The line was built by French colonialists who wanted a way to transport the ore to the Atlantic Ocean. And up to this day, a freight train also runs on these very tracks. With carriages that can add up to over 2 kilometers in length, it's the longest train in the world. As night falls, the group heads back to the train. It's been a while since the couple last spent a night on board a train, and they're at ease, unmoved by the idea of a possible terrorist attack.
If they decided to reopen this line, it must be safe now. So we can come and enjoy everything here.
The couple take a moment to gaze at the stars before heading off to bed, a view they'd have trouble finding anywhere else.
Bonne nuit tout le monde, dormez bien, allez, hop.
By dawn, they reach a railway station in the middle of the desert. 4 police squads guard the group, making sure the coast is clear before they head off for a walk.
Tous ces pitons que vous pouvez voir, c'est ce magma qui a été soulevé et qui s'est refroidi au contact de l'air, en gros. Voilà, on continue donc vers Aïcha. Là, il y a un scarabée.
They've stopped in this region to admire the monoliths, some of the tallest in the world. After they've set up camp, Sidi Ahmed prepares a local speciality known as a pegala.
In front of a fire with my dinner and some tea. Thank God.
An exceptional setting as the tourists make the most of their 3-day journey.
Mauritania there with the good news that tourists are beginning to return to appreciate the beauty that the country has to offer. Stay with us, the Midnight News is next.
Years ago, President Félix Houphouët-Boigny moved the capital city of Ivory Coast to Yamoussoukro, his native village. Huge construction sites were set up to transform the ancient village into a modern city. An international airport was built, a polytechnical institute, the presidential palace, and even one of the world's largest churches. But the planned transfer of institutions never happened, and very few people ever moved there. France 24 offers you a tour of the abandoned capital city.
Inside one of the world's most unknown capital cities, all this week on France 24.
Tourné notamment ici à Odéda, théâtre d'une bataille acharnée de plusieurs mois, retrouvez sur France 24 notre série de reportages exclusifs dans le nord du Yémen.
Don't miss this series of exclusive reports from northern Yemen on France 24 and France24.com.
romance. The French have the reputation of being passionate, first-rate lovers.
Well, Jeannie, we have a lot going for us. French is the language of love. Paris is the city of love.
But what's it really like to go out with a French person? What about French dating rules? Or what about French attitudes to marriage, divorce, and infidelity?
Join us for the next episode of French Connections Plus, where we give you the ins and outs of the game of love à la française.
French Connection Plus, presented by Jimmy Godula and Florence Villamino.
It's midnight in Paris. I'm Mark Owen. These are the main world news headlines. Caracas stalemate. Venezuela has two presidents. The upstart Juan Guaido, who's being morally supported by Washington, and Maduro still in place and with the backing of the Venezuelan army. The latest is that the US is ordering non-emergency staff from the embassy to leave Venezuela. Shutdown day 34. Two bills aimed at ending it have failed. The Republican one would have seen Donald Trump get nearly $6 billion of taxpayers' money to build a border wall. The Democrat version was to reopen while negotiations took place, and that was equally rejected. Renault's response to its scandal over its totemic chairman stroke chief executive is to name two men to take his place. Meanwhile, Carlos Ghosn, the man in question, remains in jail in Japan facing charges of massive financial irregularities. Thank you very much for being with us. The United States has called for a UN Security Council meeting on Venezuela. This follows the day when the militaries confirmed that it will stand by President Nicolas Maduro. The United States was the first international voice to speak up in favor of the man who is seeking to replace Maduro. Juan Guaido swore himself in on Thursday as interim president. A number of countries followed by giving their support for this, including key regional powers like Brazil and Colombia. The military's position then is crucial. Senior commanders have spoken out to confirm this Thursday they are standing by Maduro.
In a bid to reinforce his power as president, embattled Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro took to the stand at the Supreme Court on Thursday, denouncing once again Juan Guaido's move to declare himself interim president.
Juan Guaido assumed in the most informal, vulgar way that from that moment he was the president of the country. Who does he think he is? Is that constitutional?
Supreme Court judges pledged their unwavering support to the socialist leader, along with the country's influential army. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino threw his weight behind the president, and 8 generals followed suit with messages broadcast on state television.
I warn the people of Venezuela that a coup is taking place against our institutions, against our democracy, against our constitution, against President Nicolas Maduro, legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Meanwhile, Venezuelans on the street are divided.
The country is sad because of what happened. There was looting, there were deaths in Caracas as well as the rest of the country. The vast majority of people do not recognize Nicolas Maduro as president. He's illegitimate.
The opposition knows that the president they've chosen, Guaido, is outside the law. We have a president already elected by the majority of Venezuelans.
Wednesday's mass protests were the biggest in Venezuela since a crackdown on anti-government demonstrations in 2017 that claimed the lives of 125 people. The opposition is now preparing fresh anti-Maduro rallies for the first week of February.
And the latest we have is that the United States is ordering non-emergency embassy staff now to leave Venezuela. We'll bring you more on that, of course, as we get it. Next, the 34-day shutdown in the United States continues. A Republican bill has failed to get through the Senate. It would have granted President Trump the near $7 billion, or $6 billion rather, to build his border wall. The Democrat counter bill also failed. This one would have seen federal agencies reopen through to February the 8th while the budget accord was negotiated. Some 800,000 federal workers, of course, are going without their salaries at the moment. On the floor of the Congress, there's now apparently hope that this double defeat might inspire some more serious efforts to strike a compromise. David Smith is in Washington. He's bureau chief of The Guardian. He gave us his analysis.
we knew at the beginning of the day neither of these proposals had much hope of passing, so there was an air of grim inevitability about the voting today. Perhaps interestingly, it was actually the Democratic proposal that got more votes than the Republican one, even though the latter was supported by Donald Trump and included funding for his border wall. But the Democratic one got 2 extra votes, including Mitt Romney, former presidential nominee and a noted critic of the president. So perhaps some minor rumblings there of a Republican rebellion against the president and willingness to defy him. But right now, still very hard to see a pathway forward here. So, at best, perhaps some light, glimmerings of light at the end of the tunnel, but I think still a long way to go to end this deadlock.
David Smith, Bureau Chief of The Guardian, who joined us earlier from Washington. Political prisoners will soon be released. This the promise of the new president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. This Thursday, Felix Tshisekedi was sworn in, the country's first ever peaceful handover of power. Accusations of fraud and voter manipulation have been seemingly swept aside.
The Democratic Republic of Congo that we will build will not be a country of division, of hate, or of tribalism. We want a strong Congo, strong in its cultural diversity and its dedication to its motherland. A Congo focused on its development, peace and security. A Congo for everyone, where everyone has their place.
Felix Tshisekedi there, the new president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Next, the French car maker Renault has named 2 experienced auto executives to replace the arrested boss Carlos Ghosn, signalling the start perhaps of a new era for the manufacturer and its vital but somewhat strained alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi. Carlos Ghosn remains in jail in Japan on charges of financial irregularities.
Renault closes a chapter. Carlos Ghosn, its longtime chief executive and chairman, is gone. To replace him, the car maker split those responsibilities between 2 men. Thierry Bolloré, the new chief executive, Ghosn's designated successor, a man who has worked in Asia for years. And Jean-Dominique Sénard, the new chairman, who headed until recently tire maker Michelin.
It is important today to re-establish a form of calmness after the particularly extraordinary events that we've just experienced. There will also be a second essential task, which will be to engage myself quickly in the ongoing talks with the alliance, with our partners from Nissan and Mitsubishi.
Their common goal, saving the alliance with Nissan and Mitsubishi, something that's also crucial for the French government, which holds a 15% stake in Renault.
Our main objective is to preserve the alliance between Renault and Nissan, make it stronger, and allow Renault to function properly.
Renault took a stake in Nissan in 1999 when the Japanese car maker was on the brink of bankruptcy. Their alliance allows them to save some 5.5 billion euros per year through their common platforms, purchasing and development. But their partnership is not an equal one. Renault holds 43% of Nissan, which enables it to vote on board decisions, while Nissan holds just 15% of Renault. The distribution was decided when Nissan was weaker than Renault, but the Japanese car maker has turned around its situation, producing more than the French brand. And its leaders want to review the deal.
And Carlos Ghosn, as you say, is still in custody in Japan. That case against him continues. The novelist and blogger Yang Hengjun has been detained by Chinese authorities. The 53-year-old was a Chinese diplomat before he became an Australian citizen. Beijing says Yang is being investigated for alleged involvement in criminal activities endangering China's national security. Australia is demanding that Yang be treated fairly and transparently. Here at France 24, Catherine Viette with this.
Suspected of being a spy, Chinese authorities have detained Yang Hengjun. The novelist and political blogger was a Chinese diplomat before he became an Australian citizen.
Australian national Yang Hengjun is suspected of engaging in criminal activities that endanger China's national security. Beijing took compulsory measures against him and are investigating.
Yang was traveling to China from New York, where he's currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University. The Australian government was alerted to Yang's disappearance after worried friends could not reach him for several days.
The Australian government is obviously concerned with the residential surveillance of Mr. Yang. He's an Australian citizen, and we are seeking to provide him with consular assistance and support to ensure that he's treated fairly and transparently.
This is not the first time Yang has gone missing in China. During a trip in 2011, he was unreachable for several days. The incident was deemed a misunderstanding, but a friend of Yang's believes the academic is being used as a pawn to pressure the Australian government.
I see his arrest as the extension of Chinese hostage diplomacy, to take him as a hostage to punish the Australian government and Canadian government, American government, or the government of democracies around the world.
Relations between the two countries have been strained since Australia added its condemnation of the arrest of 2 Canadians in China. The move has been seen in the West as retaliation for the arrest of Huawei official Meng Wanzhou in Canada.
Catherine Viette, Yang Hengjun then still being detained in China. We'll bring you more on his case as it develops. That's it for now, but do stay with us. More to come here live from Paris.
Did Donald Trump make the right call on Venezuela? The U.S. president leading the way among the Lima group of North and Latin American nations that have decided, 11 of them, to recognize Parliament Speaker Juan Guaido as acting president. The 35-year-old emerging as the face of the opposition, swearing himself in on a copy of the Bolivaran Constitution. That Constitution states that the speaker is next in line if the president's out. But don't count out either Nicolas Maduro. In the nearly 6 years since he took over from the late Hugo Chavez, Venezuela's leader has beaten down all comers. And despite this week's failed mutiny at a National Guard barracks outside Caracas, Maduro still enjoys the support of army brass. We'll hear from his defense minister, which brings us back to the international community. Faced with the implosion of democracy, a meltdown of the economy that's forced a whopping 2.4 million Venezuelans to flee, are those foreign powers backing, nonetheless, coercive regime change, or as critics of U.S. policy in the region call it, is it a coup? Are EU nations right in taking a more cautious stance? Or does that make those European nations complicit in the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding inside this oil-rich giant? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, well, who's the president of Venezuela? And joining us is writer Vicente Ulive, author of I Killed Simon Bolivar.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We want to welcome as well Venezuelan commentator Gustavo Rincon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you to me.
From Washington, Ana Quintana, senior policy analyst for Latin America and the Western Hemisphere at the Heritage Foundation think tank. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Gregory Wilpert, managing editor of the Real News Network, the author of Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez Government. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 24 hours on international reactions, still pouring in to the U.S., but also the likes of Canada, Brazil, Colombia, and more recognize Juan Guaido as acting president of Venezuela. The U.S. president, in a tweet on Wednesday, calling it the illegitimate Maduro regime. At what point do you actively push for regime change inside of a sovereign state? Selena Sykes takes a look at some of the international reactions.
After being backed by Washington, Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido has won support for most of South America. 11 members of the region's Lima group, including Brazil, Colombia, Argentina and Canada, recognize Guaido as the country's legitimate president, after his declaration on Wednesday during mass protests in Venezuela and several other Latin American countries. The United Nations called for more talks to avoid the political crisis spiraling out of control.
What we hope is that dialogue can be possible and that we avoid an escalation that could lead to the kind of conflict that would be a total disaster for Venezuela and for the Venezuelan people and for the region.
Brussels and European nations also stopped short of recognizing Guaido, instead calling for new elections.
Things happened yesterday, and we have to keep working in the European Union to see what we do. But it is obvious that there will be contact with the Venezuelan regime. Do you think this can be done ignoring the reality? The reality is what it is, and we must work with it.
A message that was echoed by French President Emmanuel Macron, who called Maduro's re-election illegitimate and praised the courage of Venezuelans who had taken to the streets. A number of key allies are still backing Nicolas Maduro. In South America, these include Uruguay and Mexico, who are calling for more talks between the government and the opposition. Elsewhere, Russia warned the US against military intervention in Venezuela and said the attempted power grab was a violation of the basics and principles of international law. A similar line was taken by Turkey and China, with Beijing saying it opposes international interference in Venezuelan politics.
China supports the Venezuelan government's efforts to safeguard national sovereignty and stability. China always upholds the principles of non-interference in other nations' internal affairs and opposes external intervention in Venezuela.
The EU is hoping to set up an international contact group with South American nations in February that would seek talks between Maduro and the opposition.
Vicente Olive, in that report we saw that tweet from the French president, Emmanuel Macron calling Maduro illegitimate. Nonetheless, he stops shy of recognizing Juan Guaido as the acting president of Venezuela. He doesn't go as far as the U.S.
Yes, absolutely. There are two different things. Maduro is completely an illegitimate president because he was elected in 2018 through an election that had no international observers, where there was no opposition parties that were inscribed, except one opposition party that came from Chavismo, which was Henry Falcón. We had instances of voter fraud, and even the people that organized the election said they couldn't account for the results. So that was an illegitimate election made in May instead of December, because he knew in December people would not vote for him. So yes, he's a completely illegitimate president.
And your reaction to the fact that you have on the one hand the Spaniards, the French, the European Union with one reaction, which is cautious, and the other we've just seen in the last couple of hours, the UK Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt saying the United Kingdom believes Juan Guaido is the right person to take Venezuela forward. We're supporting the US, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina to make that happen. Not the same position.
Not at all. I think it's, well, pretty much shameful that some countries do take these steps when we have noted cases of human rights abuse that have been chronicled by different...
so France and Spain should go further.
Maybe not further, but at least the other ones that are on the tepid kind of side should establish that Maduro has to, be dealt with in a certain way through elections is what I'm expecting in the internal Venezuelan point of view. But just saying that you don't know, that you want dialogue, we've had dialogues before between the opposition and the government in 2014 and 2017. These led nowhere if it weren't for people getting jailed. So dialogue is not the route to be taken here, in my opinion.
Gustavo Rincon, Emmanuel Macron's position, does it go not far enough, too far?
I think no. The Emmanuel Macron position is you can explain that position about the situation in France. I think he have enough problem in France to start to have a speech against left wing in Venezuela. I think for that reason...
Has to do more with domestic politics.
I'm pretty sure that Gilets jaunes are more likely the reason that Macron can talk a lot about Venezuela. But about all the things you say, Vicente, I think you go very quick about all the situation in Venezuela. The last year we had election in Venezuela. We have a party for opposition that go to that election.
That's just what I said. They were illegitimate elections with no international observers, where even the people that organized the election said they couldn't account for the results, where all the opposition parties, most of them were in jail, they were in exile, people were thrown in jail. These are realities. I'm not saying it. You can look up the NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. That's a reality.
I understand what you say, but you are mixing facts. Because, yes...
You think the election was legitimate? You think Maduro was legitimately elected in a free and fair election where parties
I can say that.
Of course you can.
But you can do the opposite. Ever.
Excuse me?
You can do the opposite.
What's the opposite?
Not possible. That the election was illegitimate.
That's just what you said. You just said the election was illegitimate. You can't say it's legitimate.
No, I observe the situation and the legal situation of the government is very, very troubled.
The elections were supposed to have place in December, not in May. Yes. How is it legal to have an election in May?
That terms. The position goes to that election last year.
No, yes, it's not true.
They did. No. They did.
No, they did not.
They did.
Henry Ford was not part of the opposition. The opposition abstained. For the reason that I'm just mentioning. You don't have international observers. How can you have an election when you don't have international observers? You can't account for the voting fraud that was registered.
No, I can.
I'm stating facts.
I can
believe what you want.
You mix that about with persons that are in jail and with other things that happen in Venezuela. Look, it's very difficult to support Maduro right now, but I think his speech
Misses what?
Miss the point of view of the poor people of Venezuela, of the Chavista. You know why Maduro is in the power?
Is Maduro legitimate or is he illegitimate? That's what we're discussing. Not the
other president is legitimate.
Let's go back to the issue of the international reactions, and I want to pick up on something that Gustavo Rincon just said, which is there's an element of domestic politics when we look at it from here in Paris. The French far left up in arms. Its parliamentary leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon firing off a series of tweets saying, not in our name, because for Macron, a democratic election is, quote, illegitimate, and a far-right coup d'etat supported by Trump and Bolsonaro restores democracy. Enough is enough. Ana Quintana, is Donald Trump's and Canada and the other Lima Group nations that are with them supporting a coup d'etat?
I think we need to establish a few baseline facts here. This is not an ideological issue. This is not a U.S. interventionism issue. This is a good versus evil issue, right? So I think let's just talk about that from the onset. And I think the point that was being raised earlier about, is Maduro an illegitimate leader? Yes, he is. He is absolutely an illegitimate leader. As of January 10th, when he took office, over 50 nations declared him to be an illegitimate leader. So this is not a grand conspiracy against him. There is an international consensus, a wide variety of countries across the ideological spectrum that recognize that he is a danger to his country, he is a danger to his people, and the return of democracy needs to return. The democracy needs to return to Venezuela. This is not a coup by any shape or form.
Not a coup. Nonetheless, you're getting the sense the U.S. is tightening the screws, what with talk of further sanctions, particularly in the oil sector, of trying to funnel the money from oil revenues to Juan Guaido. In effect, it's trying to change the destiny of a sovereign nation.
So Venezuela ceased to be a sovereign nation the moment that this narco dictatorship took it over, and that's an unfortunate fact. The government of Venezuela is a criminal government. The oil industry, PDVSA, the national oil company, it's essentially a slush fund of the military. Maduro handed it over to Padrino and to the rest of the army, to his cronies in the army, as a way of buying off their loyalty and ensuring that they would stay loyal to him, right? That the upper echelons of the military would continue to have Maduro's back. And that's what they've done. And if you look at oil output, I mean, the Venezuelan economy is not in the tanks because of the international community or because of the targeted sanctions, the human rights-based sanctions, as a matter of fact. It's not a result of their own ineptitude and their own corruption. I mean, you have the vice president of Venezuela, who's a designated drug trafficking kingpin for working with Mexican drug cartels. You have over 100 Venezuelan government officials, rather, who've been designated as, who've been sanctioned by the U.S. government and other governments as well for human rights abuses and various forms of corruption. I mean, the evidence is clearly there.
Gregory Wilpert, we were having lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. One viewer saying people can say what they want about Trump, but he just helped one of the poorest, most dangerous countries in the world to have an opportunity to get back on their feet after terrible Maduro leadership. Your thoughts?
Well, there's so much to respond to. It's very difficult. I mean, first of all, whether this is a coup or not, I mean, it's clear it's not yet a coup, but clearly the U.S. government is calling for a coup, and so is the opposition. They've openly told or asked the military to intervene, to turn it against Maduro, and if they were to do that, that would be a coup, and it would mean bloodshed. We have to be very clear about this, that anybody who's saying that they're against dialogue is in favor of bloodshed. That's the bottom line.
No.
I think it's just so irresponsible to say that there cannot and should not be dialogue. Even the Pope and everybody else who is in any way responsible is saying that there has to be dialogue. And it's just, to me, it just seems absolutely unfathomable that somebody could say that they prefer the military turning against Maduro. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, about the evidence that this is a narco state, and that's just complete nonsense, is the only ones who have ever made that claim is the U.S. government, and they've never presented a shred of evidence about that. Now, I'm not saying that there is no corruption or that there is no involvement in drug trafficking in high levels of the government. That's certainly possible, but no evidence concretely, one way or the other, has ever been presented.
So you're saying that there is, I'm sorry, so you're saying that there is drug trafficking in the government, but you're saying that it's not a narco state. You're saying that the president's own stepsons, who are inside of a U.S. jail right now for attempting to sell drugs to an undercover DEA agent, is not evidence of the government, of high-level government involvement in drug trafficking? Is that what you're saying? I mean, I just want to be clear what's happening now.
Yes, those are the stepsons. They're not involved in high levels of government. It's just, I mean, they were entrapped on top of it all.
Okay.
So I mean.
Okay, so the vice president working with. Okay, I'm just. Okay, I'll just have that out there. Okay.
It doesn't. That's not proof that this is a narco state. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Okay,
yes,
that's perfectly
yes, I'd like to just add that yes, we've tried the dialogue attempt in the past, and for once I do agree with Mr. Gregory Wilpert in the fact that there is a coup d'etat in Venezuela, and this coup d'etat took place in 2015 when Mr. Nicolas Maduro did not recognize the National Assembly that won legitimately the votes, and that's the person Guaido who is now in power. They stripped the National Assembly of its powers. They set up their own puppet assembly, and even the people that organized those elections, Smartmatic, said they couldn't account for the tally of votes that were given to that assembly. No. Those are the people that are ruling now. That is absolutely true. Those are the people that are ruling now instead of the National Assembly that was the last democratically elected government body in the country in 2015. After that, in 2017 was the Constituyente when we had this problem, and last year, the election that we just proved is an illegitimate election.
Gregory Wilpert?
Well, there have been, he's right that there were negotiations and they failed, but they failed because the U.S. government intervened in various times trying to torpedo those negotiations. It's one of the main demands of the opposition was early elections. And there was a very close agreement last year where it almost happened, but then in the last minute, they fell apart for various reasons, and we have proof that there were meetings with high-level U.S. government officials and after that they canceled all the agreement. They refused to sign the final agreement, which had called for early elections. So if that had moved forward, that would have been an opportunity to prevent what is happening today. But it didn't happen mainly because the U.S. government and many other people in the radical right-wing opposition don't want real elections because they want a complete break with the current government, and that will only happen if there's a coup.
Right. Neither do the Chinese imperialists who have taken over PDVSA and basically control our petrol production and take 300,000 barrels a day. The Chinese imperialists, you never talk about, strangely. All the money that we're losing that we're giving to China, that you don't care about. But as soon as the U.S. has a dialogue with somebody from the opposition, we have to go after the boogeyman and its international intervention. What do you think about China?
Well, the Venezuelan government is repaying its loans to China. There's nothing particularly strange about that. Right. As a matter of fact, the Venezuela can only get loans practically from China at the moment because the U.S. has prevented, through international institutions, through the IMF, from Venezuela from accessing any kind of international credit lines.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to pick up on these points. Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
24, a different point of view.
My name is Osama Snoussi and I'm the Algiers correspondent for France 24. I bring you the latest news and stories from here, the capital Algiers, and beyond. You can watch me here on France 24 and also online at france24.com.
Osama Snoussi, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Watching France 24, I'm Marco, and these are the headlines. Caracas stalemate. Venezuela has two presidents, upstart Juan Guaido, who's been morally supported by Washington, and Nicolás Maduro, still in place with the backing of the Venezuelan army. Shutdown, day 34. Two bills aimed at ending it have failed. The Republican one would have seen Donald Trump get nearly $6 billion of taxpayers' money to build a border wall. The Democrats' plan was to reopen the government while negotiations take place. That equally has been rejected. Felix Tshisekedi has been sworn in as president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's promising the release of all political prisoners and to tackle corruption. His election has been recognized now by the UN in spite of cries of fraud and manipulation from those who came second and third.
A step further. With us to talk about a Venezuelan writer, Vicente Oliva, the author of I Killed Simon Bolivar. We're also with Venezuelan commentator Gustavo Rincon. From Washington, Ana Quintana, senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation think tank. And welcome back as well to Gregory Wilpert, managing editor of the Real News Network, author of Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez Government. One question about the standoff with Washington, Ana Quintana. Nicolás Maduro has given U.S. diplomatic personnel 72 hours to leave the country. The U.S. State Department says it's not going to comply with the order. What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, frankly, Maduro is not the legitimate leader, so the U.S. State Department should not be accepting orders from him, right? The interim president has stated that all diplomatic personnel are welcome there and are welcome to maintain their diplomatic representation there. And I think this is a moment where the Maduro and his officials need to recognize what do they want to happen to their officials inside of Washington, D.C.? Do they also want to be sent back? I mean, I'm pretty sure they don't want to live in Venezuela right now, and I'm sure they enjoy their lives inside of Washington, D.C. And also, I think, you know, for those wondering or are concerned about the safety of our diplomats, I think Maduro would have to be, frankly, borderline suicidal to do anything to diplomats under the administration of President Trump. I mean, let's be frank, right? We saw how the administration responded to the health attacks against the diplomats inside of Cuba. I mean, we know that the administration is going to respond even stronger if anything were to happen to U.S. diplomats in Caracas.
Gregory Wilpert, how do you see it unfolding, that standoff with the U.S. refusing to evacuate its diplomats from the Venezuelan capital?
Well, first off, I think it's unheard of in the history of the world that diplomats would be allowed to stay in a country that they've been expelled from, no matter who is the government that the U.S. recognizes. But the other thing is, of course, I mean, there's no question that they're safe. They can have a security detail of 100 people and will be escorted to the airport. And I'm sure they'll be completely, perfectly safe. There's no reason to be concerned for their safety. However, the government, regardless of who the U.S. thinks is president, has the right to expel them and will probably expel them from the country under complete safety procedures. So there's no concern there. Of course, the question is how will the U.S. react to that, and they'll probably expel the Venezuelan diplomats from the United States. That's perfectly normal, and I'm sure they're completely ready for that eventuality.
In Venezuela this Thursday, we heard this warning by the defense minister saying an attempted coup is afoot.
I warn the people of Venezuela of this very dangerous claim. It's dangerous for our integrity and our social peace. I warn the people of Venezuela that a coup d'etat is coming against our institutions, against our democracy, against our constitution, and against President Nicolás Maduro, the legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
What's your reaction? How is it going to unfold?
First of all, again, I completely agree with Ms. Padrino Lopez. There was a coup d'etat, and it happened in 2015, when Nicolás Maduro did not recognize the legitimately elected National Assembly. The best way that this could unfold is the blueprint that Mr. Guaidó has, that is calling elections within a month, pardoning people that have worked for the regime, that except those that committed humanitarian crisis, humanitarian attacks, and letting in the humanitarian aid. That would be the best issue for everybody, and it implies no violence. Now, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario would be maybe the government or Maduro himself taking a hardline dictatorship approach and just encroaching into power. We don't know enough to know where this is going to go, but it's anywhere in the middle.
Be honest here, Vincente, because we're hearing a lot of speculation.
Yes.
We're inside the same week where there was an attempted mutiny at a National Guard's barracks outside of Caracas. How actively is the outside world rooting for the rank and file of soldiers to rise up against the top brass?
Yeah, well, actually, that's the play here by the opposition is exactly that. We've tried to do this before. In 2014 and 2017, it was the same. Try to get the military to bring us to elections. So the idea here is actually giving them a free pass and saying, hey, if you're not with Maduro, then nothing's going to happen to you. So you can back a transition. So the idea here is that if the military can just flip en masse, then that could bring a transition, because what's happened before is that they've done it one by one and they've all been put into jail. So that would be also a possibility, but the international community, the importance of it is telling the military that it's okay to recognize Guaidó and call for elections.
Gustavo Rincon?
Yes. I think truly here we have only two possibilities. First one is that, like every time in that kind of situation on Venezuela, that Guaidó stay making some speeches and claiming for months and months, and just the things stay.
That's like, a possibility. Yes. Absolutely.
The other option, I think the peaceful option, the option I believe and I want, is to start to make a dialogue, to speak
again,
because you know the situation.
We've done that before.
You have to try again.
Oh, okay. And the people that are in jail,
like the leader of his party, Leopoldo Lopez, is under house arrest.
Yes, yes, but he wasn't for dialogue. He's in jail because he talked. No, it's not about that.
Yeah, but he's not the only person in jail. We have people that have been tortured. This is his document. So we tell them to wait for another dialogue.
In jail, but all the protests anti-Maduro in the last year, you know, the most part of the dead are military and policemen, not civilian.
Okay, that's another.
It's true. It's another thing.
What I'm saying, no, it's not true.
It's normal that if
we had 140 people killed in 2017, they were not policemen and they were not officers. They were. We know who they were. We documented it.
Most part of them were that's not military and policemen.
Okay, but why can't we have an election?
You know that Maduro, the last thing that Maduro wants now is civilian deaths.
What are we going to talk about?
Because Trump says very clearly, all options are in the table for any violent situation. You know, if we have 10 kills in Caracas,
right?
You know that it will be the end of Maduro, and he knows that, like Chavez.
Oh, you know what Maduro knows, right?
No, it's just you heard the speech of Trump.
Yeah, I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day. I mean, as the tweet said, yes, I mean, Trump said something sensible for once. Hallelujah. But let's not focus on Trump. Let's focus really on the things that are happening, on the people that aren't getting medicine.
Trump's decision to weigh in is one thing that's changed the equation. The other, well, it's Juan Hideo himself, unknown just a few weeks ago. Kathy Clifford takes a look at it.
Estamos en la calle. Tenemos a la comunidad internacional. ¿A quién reconoce la comunidad internacional?
An unknown figure until just a few weeks ago. Now he's been thrust into the spotlight as the face of Venezuela's anti-Maduro movement. At 35 years old, Juan Guaidó became the youngest ever president of the National Assembly. Since his election on January 5th, he's managed to get his opposition majority to officially denounce President Nicolás Maduro's re-election as fraud, a message he's hammering home on the streets.
Just because Maduro has the sash, that makes him president? Just because Maduro has the symbol of power, it makes him a leader? That legitimacy comes from the ballot box, the people, their strengths, the streets, from the recognition and love of our people.
Juan Guaido began his political career in 2007 amongst the crowds of students protesting against late President Hugo Chavez. 2 years later, he was a founding member of the opposition Popular Will Party, then led by Leopoldo Lopez, who's since been imprisoned and then placed under house arrest. The former industrial engineer then returned to his home state of Vargas, where he was elected a deputy in 2015 at just 31 years old. Juan Guaido is now calling for a transitional government ahead of free and fair elections, saying he's willing to replace Maduro as interim president if he can gain the military's backing. For now, he can count on international support from the likes of the US, Brazil, and the Organization of American States, which referred to him as Venezuela's acting president.
Gregory Rupert, what do you make of Juan Guaido?
Well, I mean, he's certainly somebody who belongs to Venezuela's upper class, and so in that sense, he's not going to be accepted probably by the vast majority of Venezuelans. But
we've had upper class presidents before. Excuse me, Caldera governed twice, and there wasn't richer than him. That's not an argument.
Well, I still don't think that he's going to be accepted. He wasn't popularly elected, but whatever. The other thing is, of course, that he lacks complete experience, of which, of course, something that they've always accused Maduro of. Okay, but fine. I mean, I don't know exactly what to expect, except that I think his course of action is, like I said before, a very, very dangerous course of action, basically calling for a military coup, which will lead to, if it were to happen, would lead to bloodshed and violence, and therefore I think that's absolutely unacceptable. I really hope that he changes course and offers a dialogue with President Maduro, and which Maduro has already said he's open towards.
Anna Quintana, you agree?
Yes. Well, I'm just saying his two criticisms of Guaido are the same, are two defining factors of Maduro. Somebody who's of the upper class and somebody who is not supported nor was widely elected by the Venezuelan people. So right there, that's a non-starter, right? We should put Maduro in a box and kind of put him to the side. I mean, it's an absolute fact. And so I think what we keep on talking about, the only two options to kind of, as the off-ramps, we keep on talking about either the military option or either negotiations as the only off-ramps for this current crisis. But those aren't the only current off-ramps. Look, Maduro has already ransacked, pillaged, and destroyed Venezuela. He's bled the country dry. His cronies have as well. Right now, he can literally get on a plane, he can get on a 747, go to Cuba, go to whatever country of his choosing, and spend the rest of his life, and that's it, and he's fine. And there can be a transitional government that's put in place. He can stop the bloodshed, he can stop the violence, he can stop it all. Right now is a very pivotal moment. Nobody's calling for a military coup, but I think now is a pivotal moment for the Venezuelan military, for the security forces, and for the Venezuelan government writ large to recognize and to sit back and take a self-reflecting moment and recognize, are they going to support as the leader the person who is an international pariah who much of the Western Hemisphere does not recognize as a legitimate leader of Venezuela, or are they going to recognize the interim president who has said that he supports having elections and he supports a restructuring and a fixing of the economy? I mean, the choices are clear.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that are complete nonsense there. First of all, I mean, Maduro...
Okay, please tell me. I mean, yeah, please.
He was elected in 2013 when running against Enrique Capriles, and the election...
So when he was appointed, so when he was Chavez's handpicked successor, I mean, that didn't give him the upper hand, right? And when they rigged the election against Capriles, that again didn't give him the upper hand, but please continue.
Yeah. And the election in 2018, the opposition boycotted. But we can argue about these points until we're blue in the face. That's not really the main point. There
weren't international observers in the election. It was a sham election. How can you say that, Gregory?
I mean, but look.
One at a time, please. One at a time. Gregory.
The way out. And the only way out that makes sense is a dialogue, because clearly Maduro believes and is convinced that he's the legitimately elected president. He's not going to resign. He's had 6 million votes in the last election, 6.2 million votes. He's not going to give that up without a clear alternative as to how to preserve the dignity and the project that he and Chavez fought for.
Sure. So look, I can convince myself that I'm Queen Elizabeth. That doesn't make me Queen Elizabeth, right? What we need to recognize is that dialogues in Venezuela, the Venezuelan government has consistently used dialogues as a stalling tactic, and they have never engaged in dialogues in good faith. They have not done so. And it's not been because of the U.S. government, it's been because of them.
Gregory Wilpert, let me ask you, because on Wednesday, when we saw those mass demonstrations, our correspondent saw with her own eyes people marching in areas that are normally loyal to the government. What does that tell you?
Well, no doubt the Maduro government has lost a lot of popular support because of the economic crisis. There's no doubt about that. And I think actually if there were elections between an opposition candidate and Maduro at this moment, Maduro would have a good chance of losing those elections. As a matter of fact, I even think that if the opposition had not boycotted the 2018 presidential election, he would have probably lost. But we don't know because the opposition does not want an election. They clearly have always wanted a complete starting over with no one of Chavismo remaining in any branch of government and basically wiping Chavismo off the face of the earth. That's been the main objective. That's the reason why they aren't interested in elections that are mediated.
But hang on, Gregory, it is the government who, faced with an opposition-controlled parliament, decided it wanted to change the constitution.
Sorry?
It is the government of Nicolas Maduro, when faced with an opposition-controlled parliament, that decided it wanted to change the constitution.
Illegally.
Yeah, they boycotted that election as well for the Constitutional Assembly. If they had participated there, I'm pretty sure that they would have won a majority as well.
What are you talking about? Where is our National Assembly that we won by the votes in 2015? Where is Antonio Ledesma, who won in 2007 when Chavez was still alive and was removed from power by Chavez? The opposition has won elections in the past, and every time they win, the person winds up in jail or the power is transferred to somebody else. So we can't take that route either. I mean, it's ridiculous that you stand here and you say that in 2017 we should have gone for the recall referendum election, which was illegitimate to start with. We had the National Assembly. We didn't want a recall referendum. And we got more votes than them in 2017. Even Smartmatic, which is the company that Maduro chose to count the votes, even they say the opposition had more votes and that they can't account for 2 million votes. They organize the elections. How do you explain that?
They were not involved in that election. They were not involved in that election. It was their machines, but they were not involved.
It was the speech about the Smartmatic. Smartmatic sell the machine, sold the machine to the government, and because the unpopularity of Maduro, they have to step aside and say, we don't, we weren't.
So they didn't check the tallies either, because the Smartmatic machines have tallies that you check that were not checked, and the government cannot account for the 8 million votes
every time that someone from the opposition won an election, they go automatically to jail.
I didn't say automatically. I didn't say automatically.
All right, before we say the assembly is, I don't know, 80%?
I told you We've seen Ledesma. The assembly doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It has no power.
For which reason? Antonio
because the tribunal nullified it like the dictatorships do. Look, open your eyes. It's a dictatorship. Dictatorships nullify the National Assembly like Fujimori did. They take the tribunal, they pack it with court judges, and they put people in jail. What more do you want? There's NGOs that recognize this. I mean, come on.
What we can agree on is the fact that the economy in Venezuela has triggered what the United Nations lists as the world's worst refugee crisis, with hyperinflation out of control. 2.4 million citizens have fled Venezuela in the past 4 years, most for neighboring states.
Before, you could have a good savings plan. You had money for that. Now, you can buy 5 or 6 things, and after that, you don't have anything left. Forget shoes, forget t-shirts, forget underwear, forget it all. We don't have enough money for practically anything. But what's dangerous is to stay here with the child that coughs. That's a flu and can take antibiotics because there aren't any. What's dangerous is to stay here with a fracture, to go around 20 hospitals with no one able to help you. It's more dangerous to stay here, to go looking for money or bread, than to go on the road.
So Ana Quintana, actively pushing for regime change, is that going to, in the short term, help Venezuela, or, as Gustavo Rincon was fearing, stir bloodshed and even more hardship?
We need to stop looking at this as though there are two binary options. What's happening right now is you have the international community, much of Latin America, and a growing list of countries that do not recognize Nicolas Maduro as president, right? Nobody is directly pushing for regime change. What they are asking for is for there to be a democratic transition. Nicolas Maduro can agree to elections. Maduro can agree to step down and let the interim president take over. There's a lot of, there's a process, there's multiple processes in place that Nicolas Maduro can agree to. But the fact of the matter is that Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, have demonstrated they do not care about their country and they don't care about their people. They just do not care.
Gregory Wilpert?
Well, it's just, again, I mean, the fact that the Maduro government and also before that President Chavez contributed to the biggest decline in inequality. And now, of course, much of this has been reversed.
How do you measure inequality? I'm sorry, I'm curious. How do you measure inequality?
It shows that they definitely do care about the people of Venezuela. And, of course, now we can argue about the individual policies.
That was 10 years ago, by the way.
But I know that exactly. I'm curious as to how he measures inequality. Like, how specifically are you measuring this? Because I'm measuring 50,000 Venezuelans fleeing the country every day. I'm looking at the last time that I was in Colombia. Every child that came up to me was a Venezuelan panhandler.
I said that it has been reversed the last couple of years because of the economic crisis, and the economic crisis can be attributed to two main factors. One is the government's own mistakes in handling the economy, and the other is the oil price, and three factors, and the other is the sanctions against Venezuela. But and it's true.
The sanctions are targeted sanctions against corrupt Venezuelan government officials. The sanctions are not against the government.
They are returning to their home countries, really. Venezuela has been harboring or has been welcoming 4 million Colombians, for example. Many of them are, have decided to return to Colombia. So it's not only Venezuelans who are leaving Venezuela.
So you're saying that the refugee crisis right now is Colombians that are returning back home?
A large chunk, about half of them are estimated. A large
chunk? And let me tell you, shame on you, because right now there are literally children that are starving and dying. There are families that are being ripped apart and separated because of this refugee crisis, and you're claiming that it's just Colombians returning back home. That's absolutely factually inaccurate.
We're going to have to, unfortunately, leave it there because we're running short on time. But I want to thank you so much, Gregory Wilpert and Ana Quintana, for being with us from Washington, D.C., Vicente Uribe, Gustavo Rincon. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Nicholas Rushworth.
Hi to you, Francois. Hi, everybody. Hello. And El Presidente, not Hugo Chavez, but Nicolas Maduro has been tweeting in the last few hours. He tweets regularly in Spanish, French, other languages, and English. We can go to his latest tweet, which is determined in that Bolivarian style. We will not accept any empire imposing governments on us by extra-constitutional means. In Venezuela, respect for the will of the people, the constitution and sovereignty will reign. We shall prevail, is what he's saying. So, two presidents, deadlock, chaos, we've seen before, of course, in Venezuela. He has two hashtags for his point of view. He has hashtag We Are Maduro and hashtag Yankee Go Home. And there you can see some of the people tweeting, saying, I voted for him. He's in a constitutional right, of course. So one of the supporters outside Venezuela is Vladimir Putin. Bloomberg has an opinion piece here saying, in terms of that geopolitical aspect of this, Putin is basically in his bid to attack the USA and other Western countries, he has to stick by Maduro simply for the fact that tens of billions of dollars are invested if the country goes down the tubes with Maduro in charge and a US-led regime comes in, or a US-backed regime comes in, then there will be a direct cost for him. So there he's saying the government has got a strong support from Turkey as well and other countries. So we've been seeing countries that are backing Guaido. The front pages of the regional press tell the story. There we've got the Argentinian front page, La Voz, two presidents, political tension increasing. We've got La Razón in Mexico saying Mexico and Uruguay are pushing for dialogue here as the opposition in Venezuela go for a frontal shock with Maduro. And here, the Colombian paper, Por la Democracia, so backing Guaido. So there are countries who are favor in the region, and globally there are also countries that are actually supporting Maduro. Just in terms of Guaido himself, his tweet page is literally the support he's getting. So here we've got Luis Alberto Moreno, who is the president of the Inter-American Bank in South America. We've got Mauricio Macri there, the president tweeting his support. We've got the Canadian Forest Minister, Chrystia Freeland. So he's just basically sending out his support for himself and what he's doing. So two presidents, what we've got in terms of the media is an erosion in terms of censorship. There is very little anti-Maduro publications out there. We do have...
But that's where social media comes in.
Well, indeed, exactly, which is where it's being fought, this battle now. But El Nacional is still going. It stopped its print runs in December.
Yes.
Now it's only online, only paper shortages prevent them. And there you can see inflation at, what is it, over 1 million %. And then you have the poor Venezuelan who is saying, I live on minimum wage, which is impossible, of course.
Yes.
So a horror story. The tragedy of Venezuela has been going on for years and now perhaps reached a head.
We shall see. Many thanks for that, Nicholas Rushworth. I want to thank our panelists once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Here at France 24, we're taking a broad outlook by talking about the women who are reshaping our world.
En France 24 en español no tenemos temas vedados. Y eso se puede ver en televisión y en todas las plataformas que tenemos en Internet.
في فرنسا 24 لا ننسى ونحجز لكم أسبوعيا تذكرة عودة للمدن والمناطق التي كانت في قلب الأحداث قبل أن تدخل في طي النسيان.
France 24, c'est la recherche permanente des meilleurs spécialistes pour vous permettre de déchiffrer l'actualité.
Claro que tiene algo especial, somos todos de distintos países y trabajamos con todo el corazón para entregar información en el momento preciso.
أخبار سياسية واقتصادية وثقافية وأيضا رياضية بأعين خبراء رياضيين. هذه هي قناة فرانس 24.
Is ever-changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what. France 24, with you everywhere, all the time.
This is WLRI LP 92.9 Gap, Lancaster, Philadelphia suburbs. Online at WLRI.org.
Or something else, and have it all off, and your friends would all say, oh, for heaven's sakes, that's not true. But if you're coming through it all, you've got to. No, if you do honest work artistically in any of the arts, you recreate yourself and don't know it. Here's your answer.
Did you ever think when you first started on the Broadway stage that you'd reach to the point where you are now with all the accolades that you've accomplished and or reached and all the awards that you've won, that you would be the icon that you are today? Did you dream about that when you first got on Broadway?
I'm totally unaware of that. Totally unaware. See, I've always wished I could go down the center aisle in the theater and say, now, which part did you like the best? The first act or the second act? Well, why did you like it? And I never get to talk to the audience. So how do I know? You know, you don't know whether you're popular with your listeners or not. You know, I'm totally unaware of anything like that. And I noticed that Lynn Fontanne and Alfred Lunt, now you're too young, I can tell by your voice, to know who they were, but they were the oracles of modern acting and modern, everything to do with the theater and live theater. And they had no idea that they would dim the lights all over the world when Alfred died and when she died. Lynn said to me, I had no idea. Alfred had no idea. They just kept, see, you've got the next audience to capture, and you might lose them. It's like walking a tightrope. You may never communicate with them. That next audience is always in front of you.
One of the great things about Broadway is, of course, there are great shows on the boards in most of the theaters that are there, yet no matter how many crowds they get, and even if they're sold out night after night after night, the reality is that most of North America will never have the opportunity to actually see a Broadway play unless those plays tour. Did you enjoy touring?
I did, and I toured all over Canada, all over the United States. We went from Vancouver straight across. I've so many times gone to I guess there are about 5 different tours of different shows. Dolly was 3 times.
Mm-hmm. Do the audiences differ from place to place?
Yes, they used to more than they do now. I'm a person who, you know, I should have put that in my book, because if you go south of the Mason-Dixon line, everything your character does is sweet. And no matter what, if they like you, you are sweet. You are just dear and sweet and feminine and all that. And then you get up north in Detroit, and all of a sudden they see the gangster side of Lorelei Lee, you know? Mm-hmm. And they see and there are all sides to a character, and to all of us, we aren't one cylinder, and they only see what their standards are. It's interesting. But the timing, the laughs are there, they're the same, and the tears are there, and it's still there, but they change your character for you.
Really?
Yeah, they do. They you can just feel it. There's a terrific response to sweetness in the South, and there's a terrific response to being durable and tough, and you can get through it, and you're going to make it. Reach for the part of the end of the rainbow, and you're going to make it. You know, they feel that ambition of the character, that side of her, and they make it come to life.
That was Carol Channing, who passed away on January 15th at her home in Rancho Mirage, California. She was 97 years old, and she was an absolute delight to talk to. A funny, smart, and talented lady. Her book, which is still available, is called Just Lucky, I Guess, a memoir of sorts. And speaking of books, it's because of people like Carol Channing, and also because of the encouragement of her publicist, Harlan Bowl, that I wrote my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Carol was one of the first stars I wrote about, after it was Harlan who put the idea in my head that I might have a book in me. Harlan and I reminisced about some of the many clients of his that I had spoken to over the years, and I got a warm feeling talking about my various chats with Carol. In a way, she's kind of responsible for my writing a book in the first place. For many reasons, she will be missed. And Stuff File program fans, you can hear full versions of both conversations I had with Carol Channing by going to our Patreon page and becoming one of the select patrons of the show. Carol shares stories about her family life, her battle with cancer while she was performing on Broadway, and more. Just go to patreon.com/The Stuff File program. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You can join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuff File program. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. This broadcast is coming to you from upstairs.